www.slcw.org, and click the link to join the group. We'll be getting started in just a few moments.
Well, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to Salem Lutheran Church's Bible study, the Sunday after Easter. So anyways, today we are going to be discussing Psalm 137. So if you turn in your Bibles to 137, you'll be able to follow along. And I just want to give you a little historical background about empires in the world of the Holy Land at that time. And we're going to start in about 600 BC. I always refer to it as BC, not the new term BCE. I hate that term. BCE stands for before the Common Era. I prefer the old version, before Christ. And in about 600 BC, the ruling empire in the world at that time was a group called the Assyrians under their great king Sennacherib. And they were followed by the Babylonians in the late 500s under their great leader, Nebuchadnezzar II. And they were followed by the Achaemenids, who we refer to commonly as the Persian Empire, who were then followed by the Greek Empire in about 300 BC. And they were followed by the Romans. Anyways, I want to focus just a little bit on the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Each of these empires had unique ways of dealing with conquered people. What the Assyrians did is when they conquered a group of people, they would disperse them through their empire. Their reasoning was that if they took people who they conquered and dispersed them through their empire to different locales, they would eventually be assimilated by the people, and therefore they would lose their identity and they would not be a threat because they wouldn't be unified against the empire. That's what happened to what we refer to as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. When the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, which was comprised of the 10 tribes of Israel, they dispersed them among their empire and they kind of were lost to history. We refer to them as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. No one knows exactly what happened to them. They just disappeared from historical records. The Babylonians, on the other hand, the way they dealt with it is when they conquered a people, they would take their best, the political leaders, their scientific leaders, their educated leaders, and they would bring them as captives back to Babylon and use them as a resource in their empire. And that brings us to this psalm, because the psalm was written during the time of the Babylonian Empire, or what is commonly referred to as the Babylonian exile of Israel. When Israel was conquered by the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar, and they were brought back to Babylon. And a lot of the Old Testament books were written during that historical time. This psalm was written during that time when their people were being held, or a good segment of their people were being held as captives in Babylon. And they stayed there until the time of the Achaemenids, or the Persian Empire, when Cyrus the Great allowed the Hebrews who were living now in Babylon to return back to Israel. And if you want to read about that historical event, their return, read books like Ezra and Nehemiah in the Old Testament. That talks about the return. But this particular psalm was written while they were still being held as captives in Babylon. And my commentary starts out by saying, because this psalm is a remembrance of Babylon, many commentators believe it was written after their return from the exile. But a lot of people believe it actually was written during their time in exile. I'm one of those who believes that this psalm has its references to the exile, when the people were there mourning their loss of their homeland and mourning and longing for their return to Israel. And so the psalm begins by them talking about their grief. By the rivers of Babylon, the psalm starts out. There we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hung our harps upon the willows in the midst of it. So it's talking about how here they are in Babylon, and they're grieving the loss of their identity as a people. They're grieving the loss of their homeland, grieving the loss of their national identity. And it says that by the rivers of Babylon. So what were those rivers? Well, the rivers of Babylon were the Tigris and the Euphrates. And a lot of historians or biblical historians believe that was kind of where the Garden of Eden might have been, at the juncture of the rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates River, where the capital city of Babylon sat. So it's talking about sitting at these rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat down, yea, we wept, grieving over their loss of their homeland. Why? When we remembered Zion, they remembered their homeland, remembered the capital city of Jerusalem, remembered where they had been. Yes, we remembered Zion, and we hung our harps upon the willows in the midst of it. So they're expressing their grief for their loss by saying how they hung their harps, their musical instruments, which they sang to rejoice and to celebrate their people, their nation of a people. And they hung their harps upon the willows, upon the trees. They hung them up in the trees because there was nothing to rejoice over. There was nothing to sing about. There was nothing to celebrate. We hung our harps upon in the midst of it. For there those who carried us away in captive asked of us a song, and those who plundered us requested mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. So here we have the Babylonians kind of ridiculing the Israelites there, making fun of them. Go ahead, sing one of your songs. Sing one of your songs of celebration. As you sit here at the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, sing a song of celebration, mocking them how they had been captured by the Babylonians and carried off into captivity. And it says, there we sat down and we wept. And my commentary says, what did they weep over? Well, they wept over the death of so many loved ones. In the battle that captured Jerusalem, many of their people were sacked. The temple in Jerusalem was sacked by the Babylonians, and many of their holy items were carried off into Babylon. Some people believe that that's what happened to the Ark of the Covenant, their holy relic that sat in the capital city of Jerusalem and in the holy temple on Mount Zion. There they were carried away. They talk about the menorahs. The historical records talk about how they carried off at least the golden menorahs. Those were the 7-pronged candlesticks. So when the city was captured, many of their people were slaughtered because they resisted the Babylonians. At the beginning, the Babylonians allowed the people of Israel to stay in Jerusalem, to stay in their lands. But when they rebelled against them, Nebuchadnezzar sent his armies to Jerusalem. He encircled the city, eventually captured the city, ransacked the city, destroyed the city, destroyed the temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, carried away many of their holy artifacts, even maybe perhaps the Ark of the Covenant. And some people believe that once they got it, they melted it down, the gold that surrounded the Ark of the Covenant, and used it for other stuff. So there they wept over the death of so many loved ones. They wept over the loss of almost everything they owned. They lost their land, they lost their temple, they lost their identity. They wept over the destroyed city of Jerusalem and the great temple, which was destroyed by the Babylonians. They wept over the agony of a forced march from Judea to Babylon. So they went on a death march from Jerusalem all the way back to Babylon, walking on foot. They wept over the cruelty of their captors who punished them and tortured them. They wept over the loss of such a pleasant and blessed past. They wept over the forced captivity of their present. They wept over the bleak nature of their future. They saw no hope for themselves. They wept over their sin that invited such judgment from God. Because while they were in Babylon, they realized that the reason they had lost everything was because they had sinned against God. God had given them the promised land as long as they were his people. When they turned against God and they started worshiping other gods, ultimately God punished them by taking away everything that he had given them, taking away their land, their possessions, and took them back out into the wilderness to suffer and to remember their loss. So the psalm is a psalm of grief. It's a psalm of loss. It's a psalm of sorrow. It's a psalm of just awful feelings of everything they had lost. And there they sat in Babylon until Cyrus the Great came along. And if you want to read about that story, you can read that in the story of, I'm trying to think of who was the queen? Esther. The Bible story of Esther talks about how Esther, who was a Jew, became queen of Persia, of the Persian Empire, after the Achaemenids, the Persians, had conquered Babylon, and how through her influence on her great husband Cyrus the Great, he allowed the Jews to return back to Jerusalem and back to Israel and to rebuild their city and their identity. But until that time, they were there. And there's lots of stories that come out of there, like Daniel in the lion's den, the 3 men in the fiery furnace, all tell stories of their time in Babylon. So if you want to read those stories, read books like Daniel. Anyways, this is what the psalm is about. And then the psalm goes on to talk about how they still remember Jerusalem. Even in their exile, they long to return. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. So how shall we sing a song of celebration? How shall we sing a song of rejoicing, of celebration? Here we are, captives in in Babylon. We've lost everything. How can we sing? How can we rejoice? And so the time in Babylon was a time to remember all that they had lost. And so they don't want to forget. They don't want to forget who they are. They don't want to forget where they had come from. And so they began to focus on hopefully getting God's forgiveness and being allowed to return. You're laughing, Tim. What are you laughing about? I can't hear you.
I'm replying to a text message I just received.
Oh, I see. Okay, nothing to do with our Bible study. Well, I'm glad you're paying such close attention.
I am paying attention. It's just I'm also responding to text.
Anyway, so it's a remembrance of everything that they had lost. And it's interesting that it was during this time in Babylon that a group of Jews came forward, a group that became known as the Pharisees. The Pharisees were basically religious lawyers, and what they did is this group examined their past and said, the reason we've lost everything, the reason we're sitting here in Babylon, the reason we've been taken as captive is because we refuse to obey the laws of God. And so they committed themselves and dedicated their lives to helping the people of Israel to understand the laws of God and to remember them. They began as a noble quest, but eventually they went too far in explaining the laws. And so to them, the laws became an end all and be all. And you'll remember that when Jesus encountered them in the New Testament, the Pharisees had become kind of his enemy because they put the law above everything else. What they did is they had taken the basic laws of God and said, well, we have to explain them to the people. So they came up with all kinds of laws to explain the laws of God. For instance, the one that says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, in their minds, that meant no work on the Sabbath. And then they began to bring laws forward that described what was work and what wasn't work. What kind of work you could do that was not a violation of the law, what work you did that was a violation. Even describing how many steps you could take away from your domicile and it not be considered work. You also remember how Jesus always came into conflict with them. One famous story where he healed a man on the Sabbath, and they said, well, that's against the laws of God. And he said, I don't believe you people. You're not going to allow healing on this because it's the Sabbath day? Or he talked about how they couldn't take an ox that fell into a river out of the river on the Sabbath because that was work. And so it was this over-exaggeration what started out as a noble cause in Babylon became exaggerated by the time they got to back to Jerusalem. So, but anyways, while they were there, they were still commiserating their loss. How shall we sing the Lord's song? How can we sing? How can we rejoice? We're in a foreign land, they say. And if I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand lose its skill. If I do not remember you, Jerusalem, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. So if I forget, let me be cursed by God, they're basically saying. So it was a terrible time for them, a terrible, terrible time for them. And so they vowed while they were there in this psalm that they would not forget. They would not forget where they came from. They would not forget who they were. They would not forget what they had lost, and they would remember. And then they go on to condemn another nation. Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to its very foundation. Historically, we know that when the Babylonians came into Israel and basically attacked Jerusalem and surrounded it, they had an ally, and the ally were the Edomites. And who were the Edomites? Well, it was a country sort of to the south of the Dead Sea. And the Edomites have their historical beginnings in the story of Esau. If you remember, there were two sons of Isaac, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob became the foundation for the people of Israel, whereas Esau and his descendants became the Edomites. And because of this conflict between Jacob and Esau, the Edomites and the Israelites were not very good friends. And so one of the historical records indicate that when the Babylonians came into Jerusalem, Edom sent soldiers, an army, to help the Babylonians defeat the Israelites. And so they remember that in this psalm. Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to its very foundation. So they said, don't forget Edom. Don't forget what they did. Don't forget how they joined with our enemies and attacked us and destroyed our capital city. Don't forget Edom and all the things they had done against us. Remember Edom, and we will have our day of revenge. Well, they did, but not for a long time. Because by the time they returned, it took them a time to rebuild. And then it goes on and talk about to judge Babylon. O daughter of Babylon, who are to be destroyed. Happy the one who repays you as you have served us. Happy the ones who takes and dashes your little ones against the rock. So it's talking about how, O daughter of Zion, who are to be destroyed. The psalmist directed his words to future generations of the Babylonian Empire, giving them notice that they themselves would be destroyed in God's judgment, that God would reap vengeance upon the Babylonians. And he did. A very famous story about the Persians. And there's a story about how Nebuchadnezzar's son, who succeeded him as the king, that he was at this banquet as the Persian Empire was marching against Babylon, and how he looked up and on the wall he saw this hand moving and writing a sentence on the wall saying, many, many tekel upharsim, which translated means you have been weighed in the scales of God's justice and have been found wanting. And so ultimately the Persians came and descended upon Babylon and the Babylonians, and basically in their mind, that was God's judgment upon the Babylonians for doing to the Israelites what they had done. O daughter of Babylon, who are to be destroyed. So here they're sitting in Babylon, still under the Babylonian heel. And they're saying, O daughter of Babylon, who are to be destroyed. They had faith that God would come with vengeance upon the Babylonians. Happy are the ones who repay you as you have served us. So what you did to us will be done to you, because God will be judger. Happy the one who takes and dashes your little ones against the rocks. Even the picture of taking their young ones and their babies and smashing them against rocks and killing them. Wow. They were a little ticked off at the Babylonians, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
Yeah. I guess for justifiable reason, because they felt like the Babylonians had taken everything from them. And but the psalm is the psalm is really kind of it ends on that note actually, and there's not a whole lot of rejoicing or celebration. Uh, but I guess the psalm says to us that when we're facing bad times, we should not forget that God is still God and that God will have his judgment. That in spite of the fact that the Israelites had turned from God, they are still his people. Yeah, he's punishing them. It's sort of like a parent, I guess. When a parent punishes a child, it doesn't mean they hate them. It just means they're trying to correct them. I always remember, and I think I've told this story before about my son was always the child who challenged me growing up. I think that's true of a lot of sons. We have a tendency as we get older to challenge dads. And I don't remember what happened, but at one point, Tim had just really made me angry. And so my normal punishment for my kids, I wasn't a great believer in spanking. I just don't think that's a way to go. But my punishment to him was what my parents did to me most of the time, and that was sent me to my room. Go to your room. Although I never understood, as I look back on it, how that was a punishment to go to my bedroom, because I had all my comic books there. I had my radio there. I even had a TV in my room, so I could lay on my bed and watch television if I wanted. I had this TV sitting on top of a closet that was in my bedroom. And so I don't know how that was really a punishment, but I always thought it was. So I sent my son to his bedroom. I said, go to your bedroom. I don't want to see you right now. And I remember a couple hours had passed, and I happened to walk past his room, and I heard him crying. And I walked in. I said, what's the matter, Tim? He said, you don't love me. And I looked at him and said, no, 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 Tim. I said, I always love you. I just don't like you very much right now. And I think that's kind of a metaphor to how God deals with us. Does God always like the things we do? No. Is he happy with some of the choices we make in our life? No. But does he still love us? Yes. He sometimes corrects us, but his love is always with us. And so I think this psalm can stand as a reminder of that when there are times that we turn from God and we don't do what God wants us to do, and we don't celebrate God as we want him, as he wants us to celebrate him, and sometimes we get corrected by God. And does that mean that when the corrections come, that he does not love us? No. I always remember the very famous verse from the Bible that says, he who the Lord loves, he chastens. And I know there have been times in my life when I have felt the chastening of God, the correction by God. And I have been sometimes known in my cynical moments to say, well, I wish he loved me a little less then, so he wouldn't
Yeah.
chasten me so much. But the point of the psalm is that even though they find themselves now in Babylon, even though they find themselves under the lash of the Babylonians, even though they are grieving over their loss, the grief is at God's correcting of them to bring them back to him. And they ultimately did come back to God. They realized the error of their way. They returned and glorified God. And as a result of which, God sent them Esther, the queen, the Jewish queen, who was to help them find their way back to Jerusalem. And then under Ezra and Nehemiah, two of the great officials of the Babylonian Empire, who were also Jews, they went back to Jerusalem. And the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah are stories about how they returned, how they rebuilt the city walls of Jerusalem, how they rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem, and how they once again began to celebrate God's presence and God's love. So the moral of the story is that even when punishment comes, even when we are chastened by God, that does not mean that God stops loving us. Even when things are at their bleakest, that does not mean that God is still not present. God is still with us. God is still loving us. God is still caring for us. And so that's where the psalm ends. The psalm ends with on a note of, yes, we are being punished. Yes, we are suffering here in Babylon, but we will return. And God will serve us as his God and grant to us joy in the morning. Anyways, that's our Psalm 137. Next week, we'll be discussing Psalm 138. I hope you'll join us. But for now, I'm going to turn back to Tim and say, Tim, what's going on at Salem this week?
Well, thank you, Pastor. It was a great Bible study this morning, and I think that we'll be covering Psalm 138 next Sunday. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. So I have it all set up for that. So today, 10 a.m., here in the sanctuary, second Sunday of Easter worship. Please join us. Come as you are. Join us in the sanctuary or join us via live stream. We would be glad that you're here. Following worship, we have fellowship with the snacks provided by Sharon. And we have Brookdale worship this afternoon at 2:30. If anybody would be interested in joining me down there at Brookdale, that would be greatly appreciated. That starts at 2:30. We'll be out of there by 3:30. And if you want to hear my sermon a second time with a few changes, join us for the Brookdale worship. That way you'll see it live. Monday morning or Monday night, we have our NFL Monday night, and that stands for Nourishment, Fellowship, and Learning. The Nourishment and Fellowship starts at 6 p.m. with a meal free to the community. Bring your appetite, bring a friend. Join us in sharing of the blessings that we have here at Salem. At 7 p.m., we continue the Fellowship and Learning portion of NFL Monday night with watching an episode of the Chosen series and then discussing it in detail. We break when we're done talking. So you can join us on Monday night starting at 6 o'clock and stay until we break. We'd be glad to have you there as well. On Friday, we continue on with our quest and our goal of reading the Bible from cover to cover. And our support network is set up for Friday at 7 p.m. You can join us by going to our website, slcw.org, and clicking that link that says Friday, 7 p.m. Click here to join group and join us for that Zoom session. This will not be live streamed. This will not be available for everyone and anybody to view. It'll only be available to the people that participate in that program. And we'd be glad to have you join us. It is Fridays at 7 p.m. where we talk about the things that we've read so far. We talk about questions that have been raised. We try to get answers for those questions. And we pray for our community and our ministries. So join us Fridays at 7 p.m. To partake in our cover-to-cover ministry. And of course, notwithstanding, we have Pastor Nathan, Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Every Sunday morning, you can join us here on Zoom, watch it on live stream, watch it again on YouTube. All these things are part of our ministries, and we'd love to have you join us. I believe that's all I have, unless I've forgotten something. Pastor, do you think I've forgotten anything?
No, it sounds like you got everything. So we've had another wonderful morning. I hope those who are listening, whether you're listening live or whether you listen to us later on this afternoon, hope you enjoyed our Bible study. I hope you'll return and join us again next Sunday. And if you're listening to us live, well, I hope you pack up, jump in your car, and come down and join us for worship at Salem at 10 a.m. We're looking forward to another wonderful service. And just want to let you know that I was sorry I wasn't with you all last Sunday. Took a Sunday off because I had my grandchildren and my daughter were here with me for Easter. Had a wonderful time with them. Spent too much money on them, but hey, that's what grandpas do. Anyways, and had a wonderful Easter. And I had to convince my grandchildren that I had the Easter Bunny's personal phone number because I had called him and told him that they would be staying at my house for Easter, and so they should bring their Easter baskets to my house instead of their house. And they still bought that. So, so that was although my granddaughter, I think, is beginning to question Grandpa and Easter Bunny, and that's kind of sad. But she kept looking. She says, well, give me the number. I want to talk to Easter Bunny. I said, no. It's a secret number only grandpas have. So she bought it so far, but I think by next year I won't have her buying that. That's a shame. But anyways, I had a wonderful Easter. I hope you all did too. And until next week, may God's love pour itself down upon you. May his love shower itself down upon you with all of his gifts. And most of all, may he keep you smiling until we all meet again. God bless each and every one of you. Have a great week.
Thank you, Pastor.
See you in a little bit.
I think I better call Dorothy.
You might want to, just to make sure she's waiting for you guys.
Okay. Can I do that now?